believe we are being recorded, so let me ask you to hit the red button on your microphone before you speak, and it'll be obvious to everyone else that you're on.
So before we get on to the agenda, we're very pleased that Chicago has been named permanent for utilities. Pleasure working with you the last few months in your business. It's great.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. It is really my privilege to be joining both the Utilities Department as well as the Utility Advisory Commission on a permanent basis. As you know, I've been acting or interim with you since the beginning of the calendar year, and as we went through a couple of recruitment processes, we decided, you know, our team is working pretty well as it is, so we've decided to solidify it and really look forward to the work ahead. We've got a few things on the plate that we'll talk perhaps briefly about this evening as we talk about the joint session you'll be having with City Council, and really looking forward to a good year and beyond.
Members of the community can address the Commission on matters not on the agenda. I don't see any requests for that now. So
just to remind you guys, this is your chance to be on TV. It's still nobody coming.
All right. Okay, we'll go on to approval of the minutes. Those have been circulated. Were there any comments on those? Is there a motion to approve?
I move we approve the minutes.
Second?
I'll
All
second.
in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Done. Did anybody have any revisions to the agenda? No. Okay. Any reports from any particular events any of the commissioners want to make? Okay. Not a requirement. Done. Director of Utilities report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. I have a few items of updates and some information to share. First, in terms of the Bay Area SunShares solar photovoltaic and zero emissions vehicle program, this is the last month. October is the last month to sign up for the Bay Area SunShares program, which offers discounted rates on solar PV systems and zero emission vehicles. By harnessing the bulk buying power of homeowners and vehicle buyers, SunShares aims to make it simpler and cheaper to go solar and purchase zero emissions vehicles. Participation is open to residents and employees of companies located in any of the 9 Bay Area counties, as well as Yolo and Sacramento counties. The last day to join is November 4th, and details and registration are available at cityofpaloalto.org/sunshares or bayareasunshares.org. Next, in terms of no better time to go solar, other reasons, if you need more reasons, the City Council direction to revise the method to calculate the net energy metering cap has allowed Palo Alto's NEM cap to increase by 13% from 9.5 megawatts to 10.8 megawatts. Solar customers can still take advantage of the NEM rate, which offers full retail value for their solar production before that NEM program closes. The city would reach the new NEM cap should reach the new NEM cap within the next 6 months, after which new solar customers will be placed into the NEM successor rate. The expansion of the NEM cap and the availability of the SunShares program make now an excellent time to go solar. Once again, information on Palo Alto solar programs are available at our website, cityofpaloalto.org/solar. Now, update on the Georgetown University Energy Prize competition. City is continuing our participation in this Energy Prize competition, which will culminate at the end of December of this year. The Utilities Department is collaborating with the Palo Alto Unified School District to develop programs designed to engage residential customers. At the core of the programs is CPAU's new utility portal, an online tool that enables customers to learn about their energy and water use, efficiency measures, and tips to reduce usage. In order to increase portal engagement, Utilities is developing an Energy Passport initiative for elementary schools, as well as a portal sign-up campaign for middle schools and high schools. PAUSD is also connecting its curriculum with the real-life information on energy and water use. We again have information on our website, this time cityofpaloalto.org/Georgetown. We have a few events and workshops upcoming with registration also at our website on September 17th. Both upcoming as well as recently passed. So recently passed on September 17th, we hosted a workshop on the SunShares program. On the 18th, we tabled the Midtown Residents Association at Ice Cream Social. On the 24th of September, we hosted a landscape design and planting workshop. On October 2nd, we tabled at the Bike Palo Alto event. Hopefully some of you were able to attend the Bike and Roll event. And on the 15th, our department will be hosting a pruning, propagation, and deadheading workshop, conservation in all forms. And finally, on the topic, and we'll come back to this on your agenda, but of the Joint Utility Advisory Commission City Council meeting, that meeting has been rescheduled. We're still finalizing a new date. Current thinking is that November 28th or December 5th might work. We will be sending out a email message and doodle poll asking for your availability to confirm and lock in one of those dates if that works. And if not, we'll keep looking.
So just to confirm, not Monday the 17th?
Correct. It will not occur on Monday the 17th. We were not able to pull together all the pieces of that joint session. And that concludes my report.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Any commissioner comments tonight? Okay. Then, Ed already mentioned, we're not going to have this meeting on the 17th. People still have time if any of you want to suggest topics for that joint session. Commissioner Cook and I will be meeting with the mayor and vice mayor to plan for that, but not for another week probably. Yeah. Okay. So the first item of new business then is the recommendation on the net metering energy policy.
Good evening, Commissioners. Assistant Director Jane Ratchie, and I'm going to give a brief update on this. This is in the your report, and so it's going to be a very brief update. So as you know, on August 22nd, as recommended by the UAC and the Finance Committee, the Council did approve the Net Energy Metering Successor Program, but they asked us to rethink the expansion policy, if you recall. And so we've done that in this report, and they also directed staff to use a modified method to calculate the cap, and we've done that. And so I just want to talk about those two things that we need to change in return to the council with a potentially a changed expansion policy. So originally, if you recall, we had a transition policy that said that you can stay under the NEM program for 20 years from your date of interconnection, and if you wanted to expand your system, you could expand it by up to 10% and still have your entire system remained under NEM. If it was an expansion that was larger than that, your entire system would be bumped into the NEM successor program. We did receive and I think the UAC heard this also, a proposal from a community group, the Carbon Free Palo Alto, to change that because they said that realistically, because the price of solar has dropped so much and people may be increasing their electric loads because maybe they get an EV or they electrify some of their appliances, that they would actually expand their system by greater than 10%, and that it was unfair to kick them all into the NEM successor program. And so they proposed sort of an interesting methodology where sort of the capacity times the years remaining would equal the capacity times year remaining in the new program. So to the extent that they expanded, the remaining transition period would shorten by that ratio, and we felt like that was a fairly good proposal. So that is the current proposal we are recommending that the UAC recommend council adopt. Just for your information, there's really no action on the NEM cap, but just wanted to let you know that we did change the methodology from 5% of the total coincident peak load to 5% of the sum of the customer class non-coincident peak loads. And so that increased the cap from 9.5 to 10.8 megawatts. So that's a little bit more room for more systems under the NEM successor. And so that direction from council will kind of extend the NEM successor to some degree.
So a little background for the students who are visiting. The net energy metering program, if you're a solar owner, lets you sell your excess energy back at attractive rates to the city. We have a cap on that, and some of us feel there's no need to pay a high price to buy back from homeowners when all our Palo Alto electricity is already carbon neutral from the city. So we still have that program, but we've reached a cap and are going down to lower rates for a successor program. And the issue is, if you're already in the program, you're grandfathered, and you want to expand your system, how much can you expand it and stay in? So this is a proposal that you can expand it as much as you want, but it then shortens proportionately the number of years you remain in the program, which I thought was a good flexible approach. Is there any discussion or questions from commissioners?
Well, I had one question. As I understand, the original proposal, you could expand your system by up to 10% without any penalty you'd stay within the NEM program.
Right.
Under the new proposal, you can expand beyond 10%, but if you expand to, say, 10%, you still have some reduction in your term.
Yes, that's correct.
Just want to make sure I understood the
Right.
way the formula worked.
Yeah, I don't have any comments other than those that might be engendered by the vast numbers who want to talk about this.
There are no community comments tonight. Well, is there a motion then to approve?
I think it's a very fair proposal. I move we approve.
Second.
All right, on favor?
Aye.
Approved.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The next agenda item has to do with approving the design guidelines for the cost of service analysis for the new program. And then who's going to present that?
That will be our acting rates manager, Eric Keniston. So he'll present these.
So why don't you give a background on COSA for our new commissioners and also for the guests?
So a quick background of what a COSA is. So cost of service analysis, in short, it's a way to allocate the expenses of a utility properly amongst the various ratepayer groups. So you have different customers use different proportions of the system. They use more energy or more gas than other groups. They might also have a greater proportion of the distribution system is dedicated to certain groups. Cost of service analysis goes through, looks at all the costs, all the expenses in the system, and seeks to allocate those costs to the various customer groups. In addition, we also usually tack on a rate study, which then goes and looks at a little bit finer analysis as to whether and how much of a fixed charge we might want to do, a minimum charge versus a volumetric rate. So that's.
Yeah. Would you want to comment on the legal reason we have to do this?
Well, for electric and gas, there's Prop 26 was passed back in November 2010, and that requires us to have all of our rates have those rates at cost of service base. We can't charge anything more, or else it's considered a tax. Water and wastewater and refuse were already held under that by Proposition 218. I want to say that was passed. Oh, I should know this off the top of my head, but that was many, many years ago. But basically what it comes down to is all of our utility rates need to be cost of service based in order to And we cannot take a profit on anything, and we cannot subsidize between customer groups, so.
So it's worth pointing out, again, for our guests, this takes away a policy tool. You can't, for example, discourage gas use by increasing the gas rates just to discourage it. They have to be connected to what the cost of providing that service is. And so we go through these COSA studies, cost of service analysis, to justify the rates that are adopted. And tonight, we're just not approving the rates, not approving the study, we're just being asked to approve the design guidelines.
Thank you. Yeah. Eric, you want to continue?
So tonight, you're correct. We are just bringing the design guidelines for the gas cost of service study. The reason why we do this is because UAC and Council have expressed an interest in having being able to add their policy questions and make sure that those issues come up when we do the cost of service analysis as much as possible. It's almost impossible once the study is underway or almost done to turn around and tell the consultant, oh, we have this idea. These are things that we need to outline and ask beforehand and see if they're even possible or things that we can consider. So we bring the guidelines to you ahead of time before we go out and bring a consultant on, and that's what we're doing for you tonight. So as background, there we go. The last gas cost of service study that we did was in 2012. We usually like to update cost of service studies about every 4 to 5 years, so we're getting about the end of when we're comfortable on this one. We want to move on, have another one, and at least verify the opinions we got. We obviously had a gas rate increase in July 2016. We're looking at potentially having another one in July 2017. We would like to be able to have cost of service ready in time for that, if possible. So we'd also, one of the things that we're going to have them look at is we know that there are carbon reduction goals that the city has coming up, and maybe seeing, what, if anything, can be done within rates there. So that's something we're already going to mention to the consultant when we start. But as we said, the design guidelines provide direction for conducting the COSA. First and foremost, obviously, rates must be based on cost of service. We can't deviate from that at all. But there's still leeway in things that you can look at. So one of the other design guidelines that we've had up here is to maximize volumetric rates and to minimize fixed charges. And this is to make more efficient use of the system. Review the applicability of all existing rate schedules. In this particular case, we only have 3 rate schedules right now: residential and a small commercial and a large commercial. So we'll maybe see if we can combine the commercial class, or maybe see if we need to break other things out. These will be part of the design analysis. Evaluate the rate design impact and the economics of electrification. If we do have a policy of moving more towards electrified system, the corollary would be that gas usage will be decreasing. And how will we design rates to adequately collect the cost of the gas system while understanding that we're going to have a shrinking volume pool to be playing with. And finally, the impact of low-income customers should be evaluated. And
again, interject for our students. Our electricity is carbon neutral, our gas is not, and our city council is encouraged, and the UAC is supportive of reducing gas use and supplanting it with electricity use as much as possible. It's called electrification. And so they're asking, what's the effect of the gas rates on people making the changes to an electrified system?
So our upcoming work plan, we're hoping by October, November to get council adoption of the COSA guidelines and to get a consultant selected and on board with the end goal of in spring bringing that final study back to you for review and having them to be used for the rates effective July 2017. And with that, I ask you if you have any.
Thank you. Commissioners?
I guess I just have one question. There's a projected rate increase of about 9%, and that is just for the sort of total revenues into the utility for gas. And so the rate design study, or the cost of service analysis, which will inform the rate design, is not going to affect the fact that the utility needs a 9% increase in revenues. It's just sort of how to apportion the fixed versus the variable, the customer classes.
Correct.
But they're not going to come out and say, oh, it actually needs to be 15%.
No. Some cost of service studies do that. If you have a financial, some places do not have a financial plan. We do all of our own financial planning. We have reserve guidelines. We have all those policies set in place. So we will be the ones determining how much of a rate increase is actually needed in
Right.
total. But what the cost of service study will do is apportion it and say, you can do it across the board, everything is fine, or a particular rate class, residential might need to go up or down, depending on how their load has changed over time. So.
Got it.
You mentioned we have three classes of customers at this point. Will the consultants or will the cost of service study recommend which customers go into which group? Is that something that they address?
It's possible that we could direct them to evaluate whether or not the existing, okay, so I'll back up. Right now, we have a residential rate schedule, which is fairly straightforward, but our commercial rate schedules are broken out to regular commercial customers, and then those who use over 250,000 therms per year. It's very similar to what PG&E's schedule breakdown is, and so part of the evaluation will be, is that something that is it relevant? Yes, but yes, it is something that we'll have them evaluate. We'll request that they evaluate whether or not, maybe we need to have more, depending on how our usage breakdown works.
Any other questions or comments? Okay.
This is Jessica Mullen from the City Attorney's Office, and just to amplify a point that Eric made when we were reviewing this slide a little bit earlier, this first principle that rates have to be based on the cost of service is kind of an overarching core principle, and he's correct that there are policy choices that we do make as we sort of apportion out those costs amongst customers, but whatever policy choices that we do make amongst sort of 2 through 5 on that slide have to adhere to that cost of service, sort of be cost justified.
Thanks. All right. Is there a motion to approve?
So just to double check, no public comment?
We haven't received
So
any
I'm
cards
just
for that.
kind of learning, if we don't get cards, we just charge ahead, that's
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
So I'll move that we recommend these design guidelines to the council.
Second?
I second.
All in favor?
In favor?
Aye. That passes.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we got through all that efficiently and ahead of schedule. Take that, James. Good. So we left time, I think, for a real interesting discussion of energy storage. And I'm sorry Commissioner Schwartz couldn't make it because this has always been an area of interest for her. So we get to be educated.
Right, we have Senior Resource Planner Shiva Swaminathan to make this presentation.
I'm sorry, Jane?
We have Senior Resource Planner Shiva Swaminathan to make this presentation for you
Very
tonight.
good.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. You have a report in front of you. This is a discussion item. We'd like your input on this. But we'll come back with an actual recommendation in early spring. So before I start, I would like to acknowledge Anne-Laure Strong, who was our analyst who undertook much of this work. She actually brought her class. Now she teaches at Stanford, so this is her class from Stanford. So we are lucky to.
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Well, some of her students are here too. Is that?
Excellent.
Okay. Anne-Laure, would you like to stand up to be acknowledged?
Very good.
And Lena Perkins is a resource planner. She also worked on this assessment. So this is the outline. We'll talk about what this AB 2514 requirement, the state law, requires us to do much of this work. Talk about microgrids and energy storage. So the idea today is to receive commissioners' input on the analysis and our finding that it's not cost effective for storage in Palo Alto, and the recommendation not to set, preliminary recommendation not to set storage targets. And also we have a pilot, outlines of a pilot program we'd like to talk about and get your input. So AB 2514 requires publicly owned utilities, governing bodies to make a determination of whether there is cost-effective storage options for each community. And it's determination to be done every 3 years. It has to be cost-effective. And the last one we did was in 2014 when we found it not to be cost-effective and no goals were set. That was communicated to the state as part of the 2514 requirement. And But here we are today discussing 3 years later, discussing our analysis since then, and we'll be filing with the state in mid-2017. So what is a microgrid? Primarily 3 elements to it: localized generation and controllable loads, ability to operate independent of the grid, and should have smart controls for it to be able to do that. So this is kind of a schematic. At the top you see the grid tie, and there are many elements of it, but in the center is a control system. For example, this building, you could consider it having a microgrid because it has a generation system which can follow the load in emergencies, and it can operate independent of the grid because we have emergency centers at this facility. So it's pretty common for and all hospitals are required to have backup generation as well. So broadly, this is the definition, but some people call their homes with PVs also, hey, I have a little microgrid. So we kind of refer to that as nanogrid, but it doesn't quite meet those standards, but then again, depends on what you're using it for. Why microgrids in Palo Alto? From a customer perspective and a utility perspective, if it can stand alone and operate in this event of a grid outage, it improves the service reliability. It can lower their utility cost, the bill they get from us. They may be paying somebody else another bill, but from the utility, their cost could be lower. And folks who want to consume all the PV within their home as opposed to exporting it to the grid can use batteries to store the energy and then use it at nighttime. So those could be some of the motivations from a customer perspective. From a utility perspective, from a distribution system, if there is some distribution system constraints, if we can use customers' load and somehow defer our utility investments on the distribution system, that'll be of value to a distribution service provider or a utility like us, and also to optimize distributed energy resources. So those are the 2 angles in which microgrids could help the customer as well as the utility. Microgrids also form an important part of the smart city context. Our Chief Information Officer is leading an effort to define what a smart city means for Palo Alto. Broadly, the concept is to use information communication technology to have more integrated ways to improve livability, workability, and sustainability. That's kind of how the smart city communities try to define it. And microgrids enable that. For example, we use the technology of sensors and communication and controls to provide reliable power for the community. It improves resiliency. In terms of greenhouse gas reduction, which is typically a reason, but for Palo Alto, because we are carbon neutral supplies, it helps, it doesn't add much to that, and improve quality of life. Microgrid findings for Palo Alto. So based on this assessment at a high level, we found there are a number of customer-sited microgrids already. Some residents have it, PV and a storage system if they want uninterrupted power supply, essentially UPS with batteries and to charge it up PVs. So there are residences who want high level of reliability. And then there are commercial facilities who have backup generation to do the same. So those are technically and economically feasible depending on your value of your reliability. From a utility scale perspective, because our distribution system is relatively robust, we don't have any distribution system constraints. And since given our move towards carbon neutral supplies, we don't think technically we can have a large scale utility scale microgrid. Typically requires some kind of a fossil generation. Utility scale, a larger scale microgrid is technically and economically unfeasible. Now, if there's a whole bunch of grant money someone puts in to demonstrate some concept, perhaps we could consider it, but economically it's not justifiable. That's our finding. So we looked at, ANLAW looked at 13 potential value streams for storage. It's discussed in attachment B. I'll go through that. And then the document or the analysis also looked at policies and regulations related to storage. And then we did 3 case studies, Palo Alto specific case studies. So I'll be going through them. So this is a classic chart put together by Rocky Mountain Institute. It outlines 13 applications in 3 segments of the electric utility. You see the customer perspective over here, the utility services, and the ISO. So there are 13 applications here. The broader point here also is if the storage system is sited at the customer premise, which is what this says here, it has a potential to provide all 13 services. So siting the storage is very important, where to be sited. So a customer-sited storage system can meet multiple needs. And similarly, if it's at the distribution system level, it can meet multiple needs. But if it's at the grid-tied level, clearly it cannot meet the downstream requirement. So that's the point of this chart. And we looked at the value stream associated with each of the 13 individually. And this is what we found on a benefit to cost ratio. 100% here in this pilot chart means benefits equal cost on an annualized basis. That it doesn't quite pan out on an individual basis. But the key is if we can find multiple value streams which we can build one on top of the other, it could potentially become cost effective. But those are unique, one-of-a-kind applications which we have to search hard and very hard to find in Palo Alto. So not cost effective for individual applications in Palo Alto is the finding. And so we went and looked at some of these applications on a potentially joint basis. So first application case study is for residential PV using storage to store the excess PV. So what you see here is this is the customer's original load, and this is the PV load, and the net load without storage is what you see here in blue. But if we can have storage, we can store this excess power instead of exporting it to the utility and use it here. The difference between export rate under the NEM successor program, which you commissioners just talked about, this export is bought by the utility at our avoided cost, which is currently 7.5 pennies. But the energy supplied at a marginal, the tier 2 is about 17 cents. The cost differential between excess sale versus utility supply is about 9.5 pennies. So if they were to, they can use storage to try to capture that value. but storage costs are pretty high that the actual value of storage is only about 15 to 20%. So in other words, the actual storage cost is about 50 cents a kWh versus they are able to capture 9.5. So that's what we're finding. But storage costs are going to come down, but this is what we are thinking currently. In 3 years' time, it would most likely be very different. This is a second application. This is on the commercial customer side. Commercial customers have demand charges, which are about $20 a kW month. So, and by using storage, they could peak or shave off their demand charge by this amount, and using batteries. And that application in the commercial side also, again, is not cost effective. It's about 40% cost recovery would be possible. The third application is a grid-tied battery, providing the highest grid services, which is in the grid market, the frequency regulation services is the highest value. This just illustrates how it could be gathered, but that application, again, the value of storage, the value of storage is about 30%. Now, as the renewable penetration increases to 50% by 2030 or thereabouts, the state anticipate about 10,000 megawatts of storage would be required to balance out the intermittent resources. And this frequency regulation service cost, which is currently about $10, is expected to rise, double, triple, quadruple. So if it quadruples, that 30% cost of ownership, 30% value would quadruple and it will become cost effective at that time. So storage is here too, is here. For Palo Alto currently, it's not cost effective, but it is coming, given our state mandates, given our high renewable penetrations the state wants to achieve.
Quick question on
Yes.
that last slide. So for it to be grid-tied storage, what are the constraints on where it's sited to be able to provide that service, frequency regulation service?
It could be, technically, it could be at the customer premise and still do it. The control systems and the communications have to be worked out, and we are in the process of trying to design a pilot to try to see whether we can. So each of these you see are individual value streams, and so we're trying to see whether we can stack up some of those value streams. It's still not be cost effective, we think, but at least experiment, do pilots to try to see whether we can capture multiple value streams. So yes, this could be potentially
It could be
achieved.
customer-sided, but they would have to sort of relinquish controls to the system operator or to the utility to be able to charge and discharge the battery to provide that service. Got it.
Now, you could do that, but then if the customer wants reliability, when power goes out, then they can't. So
Yeah,
some of them are
right, they
not.
give up one value stream to get the other one.
Correct. So finding the right balance is the key here. So storage is a long-term option, though it's not cost-effective now. The state has mandated and is in the process of procuring 2,000 megawatts of this, and it's anticipated to get to about 20,000 megawatts by 2030. So the key is for us to, from an analysis perspective, without deep community outreach to see what type of value streams could we harness, multiple value streams we harness is kind of our challenge. So we think there will be applications, depends on a customer specific and customer purposes. And again, long-term option because storage costs continue to decline, PV installation costs continue to decline. There are smarter inverters which bring more versatility to the grid. And also ability to control loads also becoming more feasible. So all those market trends will make storage a key part of the future electric grid. So given that, staff is considering proposing a storage pilot scheme where we want to try to learn by doing. This is mostly a market-based analysis, but not actually doing a project. So we are proposing a customer-sited, customer-owned storage system that provides value to both the customer as well as the utility, and potentially us bidding into the Cal ISO. We are proposing a potential pilot of 500 kWh, which is relatively small. And so effectively, it's a 4-hour storage system of a capacity of 125 kW. You need a minimum of, to bid into the ISO, you need a minimum of 100 kW. So that's why we kind of designed it at 125. Utility rebate, so the customer has to find sufficient value, and we'll rebate about half the cost, is the thought. And a 5-year pilot, they will have to provide us controls when we require them, including participation in our demand response program. So those are the elements. Open to, in terms of next steps, feedback today. We'll come back again in March for a broader discussion. And based on that input and approval, we'll go to the next step. So I'm open for input. Please.
So I have to confess to being utterly confused. So I've been an advocate in the brief time I'm here, as a number of other commissioners are. So I've got gas hot water heater and gas heating in my home. So we switch to electricity. The power goes out. Why isn't almost anything cost effective at that point?
Power goes out. You're talking about...
I thought that's what we were trying to protect against. We wanted reliability in the electric system because we made everybody switch to electricity.
Okay, there are two parts. I think there are two parts to that question. One is, why do you want to switch from natural gas to electric? That's for greenhouse gas reduction purposes. But is that putting you at a greater risk of being inconvenienced in this example?
Exactly why we have the agenda item.
Actually, why don't you step back and talk about the state requirements for storage in the broader system and why the state is doing it?
Okay. Given the intermittency of renewables and the state's goal currently of getting to 50% renewables by 2030, storage is a key element. Fast-acting, load-following resources is a key element. So state, for 2020, they have a procurement target of 2,000 megawatts. So that's what the state is doing. Intermittency, to firm up intermittency, storage is a key. Currently, the intermittency is followed by hydro projects and natural gas turbines. When the wind drops, these generation sources come up and make up. So that's the state. But I'm still trying to grasp Commissioner Turnbull's question.
So
well, you could not electrify and natural gas supplies could go out too. And
say it again.
You could not electrify and the natural gas supply could be disrupted too, say in the event of an earthquake. I heard on NPR recently, in the event of a major earthquake, this is the radio what I heard, the electric system is likely to come back within a week, but the natural gas system could take up to 6 months. This is what I heard. So either way, you're at risk. But yes, you're at risk on two. If you have two fuel sources, you're more diversified. Yes, so there is a diversification value of having two fuel sources coming into your home. No question about that. So, but it is that trade-off each of us have to make.
Would it be helpful to go back to the slide with, I call it the spiderweb slide? Because I think the 13 sources of value, or
Yes.
that one, or even the previous one, so I think what Commissioner Trumbull is thinking of is, at the backup power for the customer, which is, one way that storage is interesting and valuable. But there are, but there are lots of others that are part of the discussion, and frequency regulation for, to compensate for intermittent renewables is one that is especially valuable right now, if I understood your presentation.
It is.
In terms of like it's valued by the market
Correct.
at a very high number of dollars per kilowatt hour.
Yes.
Or,
It's relatively low compared to historic levels because of low natural gas prices, but it's
Okay.
expected to go up.
okay,
With
that was
increased-
the one you said is expected to triple or quadruple over time. But that's where, so there's a lot of complexity to it, I guess, is what we're discovering. And I think your point is, you said early on, the value of the reliability for the customer depends on how much the customer, that's not something that the market puts a price tag on, that's something that each customer, but you said that there are residential customers that have built themselves a small microgrid. Are there a lot of, you mentioned hospitals and you mentioned City Hall, are there a lot of other commercial customers that have done this? Can you give us some examples, just to sort of give us something to relate it to?
Without getting into identifying specific customers, I know Stanford
Or
Hospital.
industries?
Yeah, so hospitals. Stanford
Right.
Hospital has a backup generation. We have one. There is a move to look at Kabali to see whether we can put PV and storage there. That's another emergency center for residents to show up. And then there are commercial customers. Any server farm has servers, have UPS batteries. I mean, UPS is well-known, uninterrupted power supply.
And that's typically just big batteries. It doesn't
Correct.
usually mean that they're being charged from photovoltaics.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. So those are the long-lasting applications, well-understood applications. And why are the residents doing it? Depends on their service reliability. This particular instance I know, the resident works out of his home. There is a server there. He relies on it, and given the multiple needs, that's a choice he made. And was cost effective for him. The value was sufficiently high, but so that's where and if you're totally reliant on electricity and not natural gas, then having a microgrid in your home would make more sense.
So
Along with PV.
So you understand what I'm saying? At previous meetings, we're saying we want to get off of natural gas and everybody electrify. So I'm looking for the answer of what we tell the homeowner after they've done that. And it can't be, well, you made a dumb decision, you ought to diversify.
Well, I think, as Shiva pointed out, the messaging, for lack of a better term, is really one of multiple goals. And in the case of electrification, it's the goal of reducing carbon footprint. And in the case of storage, again, this analysis demonstrates that it's not cost effective to the extent that the market can value the cost and the benefits. If there are other, whether it be intangible or customer-specific values to reliability as one example, or to being on the cutting edge of the technology, then that could justify the investment at a customer level.
And to add to that, the electrification at homes is not necessarily cost effective now, to begin with, leave alone the reliability part. So people are doing it, the early adopters are doing it because they want to win themselves. They don't want smoke coming out of their smokestack at their home. But along with that comes your reliance on, you can't have a hot shower. So that's a choice they make, and so we are not compelling, we are encouraging.
So I have a question, this is background first for the audience. Palo Alto has large utility scale solar contracts, and it gets some waste to gas, electricity, and then a lot of hydro. But that all goes into the vast network, and we actually draw our electrons from the PG&E network. So as I understand it, PG&E has to worry about frequency response and intermittency, but we don't. Is that correct?
Yes and no. Palo Alto is part of NCP, a pool, a quasi pool, where we operate our own quasi control system. So we have to maintain not frequency, but maintain resources. We have to show to the ISO that we have fast-acting resources which are capable of doing that and can come online as requested. So if we don't have it, we'll have to pay for it. So either way, the responsibility is not ours, but the cost we bear along with everybody else.
Okay, so this could go towards that, although it may not have a high value.
Correct.
Okay. I guess the other issue is storage is used for arbitrage between high and low energy prices, which can be extreme in many markets. For us, it's minuscule.
Yes, so pure energy arbitrage is a very low value. Given the cost of storage.
Yeah, for Palo Alto in particular. Okay. So the analysis here is for Palo Alto. Other cases, you could make a stronger, other situations, you make a stronger case for storage.
Yes, what's driving the current projects is not cost effectiveness. It's a long-term plan. We need to get this now so that we can have the operational experience that by 2030 we have full knowledge and systems can develop. And that's what's driving the current large investments.
Okay.
Can you go back to the slide with the pilot project proposal?
Yes.
So is the idea to find a customer who wants to be a partner in this pilot program and who agrees to site storage at their location?
Correct.
Okay, and to participate in demand response for 5 years?
Correct.
Okay.
So the rebate we are providing, we think the cost is about $1,000 a kWh, so we're going to provide up to a half that cost as rebates. So the customer has to have a value proposition there to invest on their behalf. And then we'll try to find ways to maximize value. It's still overall, it's probably not going to be cost effective, but we'll see whether we can get to 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%.
Okay.
And learn from it.
Right, and learn how to operate it in a partnership with the customer and so forth. Right.
Correct. So the key is to be sited at the customer premise, and it could be commercial or residential. We're hoping about half of those systems in commercial, half of them in residential.
Oh, I see. So you're not looking for one customer to do one 125 kilowatt installation. I see. Okay.
No. It may end up being that, but we're thinking it's more than one.
Have you identified any prospects out there for the pilot programs?
There have been requests or questions, but we haven't had any detailed discussion. So the key is a vendor could, if there are 10 kW systems at homes, a vendor could aggregate those 10 and bid it. So we'll work with the vendor. It may be 10 homes of small systems, and that may be 100 kW. And then so that aggregated system would be dispatched. So controls is a key part of this, ability to control remotely and dispatch as needed.
So you could talk to one of the vendors that does these demand response behind the meter energy storage systems and subsidize them
to find a location within Palo Alto. That's another way to do it, yes.
So just incidentally, I work with a number of battery technology companies, and I'm in favor of storage technologies evolving. I accept your analysis that the value proposition isn't there yet for Palo Alto. I'm not sure I'm persuaded that we should spend $250,000 testing out the ideas at this time. And there's a lot of good uses for that money within the utility department. we're doing this because we feel compelled by the state to do something?
No. It is more of the thought that we need to learn about this. Customers are going to adopt it. How do we permit it? How do we evaluate the impact unique to Palo Alto? And to learn from it. So yes, it's an R&D. So yes, it is, $250,000 is a lot of money, and that's part of the discussion.
Have you talked with any of the commercial companies that are putting these systems in for commercial customers?
Yes.
Is there some collaboration we could do with that where we'd get some of this learning at a lesser expense?
Lesser than?
$250,000?
We can scale it down, but there are two parts. One is what is the cost of the system and how big a system do we want?
Yeah.
So the idea of 100 kW system, that's 125. That's the kind of minimum size ISO would accept as a bid. So that kind of determine the size, and then the cost is a 50% subsidy. We think that's what we'll, if we were to do it, and we are not saying we have to, but that's the discussion here.
So the value would be experimenting with having this resource that we could bid into the grid when we wanted, into the ISO system, or not, and finding out if we get more involved in that trading.
To meet the requirement. So we already have an obligation. We meet that obligation through our hydro project, the Calaveras project, which provides that regulation service.
Okay.
So this will be another resource. Calaveras is 20 megawatts. Here we are talking about 1/10 of a megawatt.
Let me ask you a question about how we meet it through the hydro. We're part of this big hydro pool, but we don't have control over the water going over the dam.
We do.
Oh, we do. We
Yes.
can signal it to let out more on behalf of Palo Alto.
That's correct.
Okay. So some of this we already do. Can you be more specific about what we learned from this? Or experiment with
Right.
that we can't do
So
now?
so broadly, this technology is coming. It may come late to Palo Alto, but it's coming, it's already there. So that's broadly. Customers are inquiring about these and are looking at these. Issues of permitting, what level of permitting, what type of permitting should we need to do. If customers are going to do it, is there some win-win ways we could adopt these in a small scale? Those are primarily the two areas. And thirdly, could we afford it? That's a fair question.
Yeah.
So that we've kind of grappled with, and we think we're using R&D funds that this level of expenditure, again, this is not per year, this is one time, or like a 5-year pilot. So it's, you can call it 50,000 a year. It's something, a reasonable amount to invest to for R&D is a thought.
Yeah. I'm not against R&D, I just want to make sure you feel you have strong reason to do it. And
right. So a comparative number is we spend $10,000 a year on demand response. We have about 200 to 500 kW of demand response, commercial customer demand response. That also, that is broadly cost effective. So this is all part of trying to optimize the distribution system, distributed energy resource mix. So DR is clearly number one, and storage is way behind all this, but there is a greater need for reliance on it for the state, not necessarily for us, but part of it is to learn with this. Again, on rate making is another aspect of it. How do we, if there are wide adoption of these storage technologies, what is the impact on retail rates? If customers, so all that learn by doing as opposed to theoretical work.
Could you go back to the chart with the benefits and where you've evaluated them? So this is the one we'd be playing with to see with a $250,000 how we would do on these different indices. Is that it?
Repeat that again, please.
If we had the installed system, we'd be seeing if we could get benefits on these different axes.
Correct. So for example, backup power, which there was ANLA did some businesses value, certain businesses value backup power. So that we found, depending on the business, if you're having it, you clearly value it. But for example, you cannot harvest the backup power value and a demand charge reduction value at the same time. Backup power means you must have it all primed and ready to be used. So, but you could have...
and we won't learn much by providing backup power.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there more questions, discussions from the Commissioner? This would, by the way, any of you out there want to have questions, we do have procedure and we can dispense with the cards if anybody wants to ask a question of the folks here on the storage proposal.
So if I can reiterate, I just never got my question answered. It didn't seem like anybody in staff cared to answer it.
I guess we're maybe a little confused too. I mean, what I understand is you have the thought that if you just went with electricity as a single fuel source into your home, that
I
you'd be
apologize for the
more...
interruption, but my impression was our commission made it pretty clear last time, not in a formal vote, we wanted to do it. And we're hearing about reliability because that's the major impediment to electrifying. And so I think we got to have an answer if we're encouraging residents to do it, other than it's their own fault.
Yeah. I think we have extremely high reliability on their electric supplies anyway. So I'm not sure, maybe Shiva, you have a better answer about, are we exposing
Maybe the disconnect
people?
is that, and why we get puzzled looks over here, is that 125 kV of storage wouldn't be enough to keep our grid active if things went down. It would have to be backup power on
I understand that, but if we're telling people to electrify, I only use myself as an example, but my next door neighbor is willing to buy a very expensive backup generator for himself to avoid the problems. I don't think we can just say, well, we can't determine what the value is for homeowners.
Sure.
Yeah, the other part of that answer is, remember, there has been no recommendation on electrification. The only direction we've received so far from council is, please evaluate electrification as an option, and we've evaluated it twice so far, and in both cases, at both times, it's not been cost effective, except for a very small niche of a new construction for heat pump water heater, or for transportation in the form of a relatively inexpensive car, the Nissan Leaf. And so those are there is no, we're still at the point of evaluating and trying to develop
I'm in
pilots.
agreement with you on,
and we
on that.
aren't walking down the road yet of wholesale advocacy for electrification. So I think at that point, when we come back with some recommendation, if we do, on electrification, that would be a good opportunity to bring up, what are we exposing people to a risk of a problem with reliability if they are changing their heating of water or space to electricity? Are we?
And this seemed like the forum to raise it. We don't have to wait for a staff recommendation. We were talking about it at the last meeting, and maybe I'm naive, but I thought that's what the reliability discussion showed up at the very next agenda for. So
I think there might be some confusion. I believe the reason this is on the agenda today is because it's a requirement of AB 2514 that the utility revisit this issue every 3 years. So I don't think this pilot program was the brainchild of a discussion at our last meeting. I think the word reliability means so many things in so many contexts that it's become a connection that maybe is not actually causal from the last meeting to this.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. This is AB 2514 requirement that's part of the analysis, and that requirement is intermittency, and so that's storage and intermittency, that's what the connection is. But you're right, it has connection to what you're talking about too. Yeah. But that's not the central crux, but that's point well taken. So
tonight's topic, agenda item, is a discussion topic. We're not asked to make any decisions. There's not a formal recommendation. So one question would be, is there anything that you do with storage that you can't do with demand response?
Yes. The demand response is bulky, so it's you can't bid. It's hard to do demand response into the reliability, the regulation market, for example. You need granular control of it. So that's one. And we've had a voluntary program, so we do not impose any penalties if a customer doesn't show up. So it's so yes, this is faster acting and more reliable.
Okay.
But it's, again, DR is, we do it with $10,000 per year kind of thing for 300 to 500 kW. This is magnitudes more costlier.
Sure. Well, I'm all in favor of R&D as you contemplated. I just wonder if there are more demand response programs and ideas out there where some of those R&D dollars might be more productive. For example, people working on using car batteries for demand response. There's already programs going, or startups out there. But I'll leave that to staff to.
We are working on a program on that area as well.
Excellent, excellent.
So it'll come to you probably in the similar timeline, March timeline.
Excellent, excellent. We do have in the utilities program capacity for trials of new technologies, right? And we have new commissioners here who haven't heard about that. This might just be a moment to explain what's. I don't know how active it's used, but.
So we have a program called the Program for Emerging Technologies, PET. The idea behind that is to provide our infrastructure as a test bed for any new technologies which want to come and test in real situations, real life situations, how that technology can be deployed and used. There is no funding mechanism for that, so it's purely, they have to provide it free of charge. And if the only consideration we have is when we evaluate those requests on a quarterly basis, is it applicable to Palo Alto? Is there a sufficient resource? Do we have a good site to do that? What's the work impact on Palo Alto? And those are the three main criteria for Palo Alto staff. Right. So projects we have done on that have been street light, mounted PV systems, which also monitor the voltage of the distribution system. We've done lighting controls at the garages here at City Hall. We've done grid-tied capacitors. So we've done a number of, but there's no budget to go with it, and they are short-term projects. So that's another way we encourage new technology.
I just would like to add a little bit. There is some funding, but it's not to buy any products or make any expenditure that way. But we are willing, and the program does have an associated budget for a third-party evaluator to come in and evaluate these programs, because that's kind of the product that these would produce, is this thing that you gave us to try did or didn't work, it performed like this, and so we either staff will do it or we will hire a third party to evaluate the program. And another reminder about sort of R&D is, we do have public benefits funds that are collected, and one of the 4 allowed uses for those funds is for R&D. And so that would likely be the source of a pilot, a storage
Okay.
pilot, if we did go down that road.
Okay, great. Great. Was there more discussion, or would you like to make any further comments before? Okay. Great.
No, that's good.
I guess I would just say, yeah, like Commissioner Danaher, I'm in favor of R&D, and it does feel like there are some interesting lessons that the utility could learn from trying to do a small-scale project on our own. So I'd be interested to see a proposal for, a more fleshed-out proposal for the pilot at a future date.
All right. I think that's it for that agenda item. The next one is talk about topics for discussion at future UAC meeting. You have the rolling 12-month calendar here. And I don't know if there are any suggestions, but if you don't have any now, anything can be provided to Commissioner Cook in the meantime, or directly to Ed or Jane.
So, yeah, I guess I'm just trying to scan here and see if I'm not missing it. You know, but we had an update in our last meeting about fiber to the premises and how the situation has changed. And I would welcome the opportunity to keep talking about fiber to the premises and what should be our next steps. That might be maybe something for a joint discussion with City Council, if they're interested in us taking that on as well.
Well, last year they were, Ed, I don't know if next month is too soon for an update on that, or December perhaps?
We can discuss that among staff to see what the readiness is to bring that directly back to UAC. To your point, I think it is certainly both a fair topic for discussion with City Council, as well as to a certain extent expected, that the question of the role of UAC and other citizen committee that has been looking at fiber would be a good topic for revisiting with the council and to try to get some clarity on whether there's any particular segment of that discussion that the council would like the UAC to focus on.
All right. I also understand now that you're in that seat for the long term that you and the team are going to be thinking about strategic priorities and the like, and more ideas for topics may come out of that process.
Very much so. Appreciate your raising that among staff. We have just started envisioning a work plan around a strategic plan update, and so we would look to bring that back to the UAC. Haven't settled on a specific date at this point, but definitely would want to engage the UAC at whatever extent that you're willing to walk with us, whether it be as a body or it may even be conducive to setting up an ad hoc subcommittee.
Sure. Sure. Okay. Any further comments or questions for tonight? This is the first UIC meeting I've been at that hasn't run over the allotted time. So you can rest assured that the time we save today will be spent on some future meeting. So then I declare the meeting adjourned. Thanks. Thank you. Great reports as usual. Yeah.
Things with this discussion items is hard to what is what they're looking for.
Thank you, sir.
Sure, sure. I hope it wasn't too dull for your students.
Oh, I think of nothing else. I like